And so by having all these differing groups, each of whom has a different model of how human behaviour should be changed, but only accepts one model, is like having a bunch of people, one group who are prepared to talk about electromagnetism but refuse to address the existence of gravity. And it's not very helpful if you're trying to build a train, because they build a really good electric motor for the train, but actually forget the need for the bastard to stick to the tracks, or something like that, okay? So trying to do anything significant with only acknowledging one of those physical forces is almost impossible. And what we have is a load of agencies that try and pretend that there's only one force at work in shifting human behaviour. And the problem with that is, you can be useful as an expert in electromagnetism, but you can't really be fully influential and valuable. No one's going to come to you with the big questions. They'll come to you and say, my motor's buggered, can you fix it? Because that's probably all you need at that point, okay? But actually, if you want to be involved in really major decisions, you actually need to understand multiple forces. And where the whole advertising, and indeed to some extent the direct marketing business and the digital business have all been at fault, is they've all developed models of human behaviour based on whatever they make money from doing. And they basically go into denial about everybody else's. But the real way for the agency business to move forward is if you, and behavioural economics is very helpful in this way. What behavioural economics tells you is that depending on where you are in terms of the point of decision making, there are various forces at work that will bias you in one direction or another that may be independent, by the way, of brand preference. And when you understand the multiplicity of forces at work, then you can become a really, really interesting body, and people will go to you and say, how should we change tax policy? If we as bodies learn from academia and learn from each other, and actually develop a fairly holistic view of what's going on. And there are loads of forces. You know, patently, there's a massive force that tells people to buy the brand leader. You know, there are Earlsian forces of herd, which say, I'll adopt opinions from my friends, but there are also herd forces which operate much, much closer to the moment of purchase, which is, I'll go to the restaurant that's slightly more crowded, within reason. Obviously, you've got to get a table, but actually a restaurant that's empty is probably a bit shit, whereas a restaurant that's 3/4 full is probably pretty good. So actually, when you add up the forces, what you realise is that human behaviour, unsurprisingly, is a product of quite a few forces, some conflicting, some operating in tandem, that operate on the individual or the group. And so any new agency of the 21st century just has to acknowledge that, you know, since the most brilliant brains in physics have never been able to get it down below 4 fundamental forces. And they've tried, by the way, and there are people who claim you can kind of make 2 of them the same. But I mean, that gets into weird quantum shit, and I don't understand a bloody word of it, okay? But if you think about it, if these people like Hawking and goodness knows who else, they can't get it below 4 forces, it's pretty ridiculous for marketers or agency people to sort of claim that everything's determined by just 1. I noticed this early on in direct marketing when I noticed that even if the proposition was the same, the price was the same, the product was the same, the target audience was the same, the channel by which you allowed people to respond, whether it was phone or post or phone and post, had a ludicrous effect on whether people responded. I don't just mean I don't just mean some trivial little you can get an extra 3% of response by offering the telephone. You can double, if you have telephone plus post, it's probably double or even 3 times the response rate you get through offering telephone only. Well, that's patently not about propositions, it's not about price, it's not about anything else. There's something else going on in terms of incredibly strong channel preference. We found it later that when you allow young people, charities, we always assume young people didn't give to charity, but if you allow young people to donate by text message, they become quite generous. I heard a very good presentation from someone about website design, which said a lot of it's about flow. Do you feel comfortable and natural following this course of action? Okay. Now, brutally speaking, I don't want to offend our Royal Mail sponsors, but if you're 17 or 18 or 23 years old, the business of sending a text message is something you do 150 times a day, whereas the business of writing a cheque and sending a donation by post is something you've never done before. So that feelings of facility and flow that you get from doing one or the other have a huge effect on your likelihood to do it in the first place. But I think, to claim that it's all about the proposition and to waste, in many cases, loads and loads of money farting around with product propositions or really expensive product reformulations, when actually what's needed is possibly something quite trivial or small, I think is a really dangerous mistake. So creativity can't really be fully credible in saying you're only really powerful as anybody if you can go to someone and not just say, this would be a good idea. You've got to be able to go to people and say, this is how you should spend your money. This is how you should spend your time. This is where you should invest. Until creative people have enough of a framework about human behaviour to be able to say, don't do that, do that, then I don't think we can fully claim our place at the top table, which I think we deserve. You know, I genuinely think there should be some sort of creative or psychological role, you know, on the board of every PLC. But the marketing director isn't there at the moment.